the Woodward book yesterday, and now this op-ed anonymously written in the New York Times. This person writes that there's confirmation that there's people within the Trump administration, within the president's cabinet, who were actually considering going to the 25th Amendment to the Constitution to try to remove this president because they feared he was a threat to U.S. national security.
I've never heard that before, this palace intrigue. I don't mean to bust the bubble here, but most people in South Carolina are not going to take the op-ed in the New York Times very seriously. Bob Woodward's a good journalist. There's no doubt in my mind that whatever he wrote in that book, he had sources for, but at the end of the day, he's going to be judged by results. President Trump, in my world, where I live, in South Carolina, most people are very pleased with what the president's doing.
Because this individual who wrote this article in the New York Times clearly is, the New York Times, you believe the New York Times would not have published it if they had not confirmed it was a senior Trump administration official.
That could be one of a bunch of people. All I can say is I've never heard this before. I'm going to judge the president by the results, and I like what he's doing with judges, what he's doing with the military, what he did with taxes, and that will matter in my world. In my world, when the New York Times speak, most of us don't listen. Nothing against the paper, but it's sort of seen as the voice of the left.
Because the author of this article says the successes, and you refer to successes of the Trump presidency, and according to this senior administration official, have come despite, not because of the president's leadership style. This author also says this president represents a danger to the U.S., and I know you're interested in foreign policy. In public and in private, the author writes, President Trump shows a preference for autocrats and dictators such as President Vladimir Putin of Russia and North Korea's leader Kim Jong-un, and displays little genuine appreciation for the ties that bind us to allied-like nations.
Well, you know, all I can say is I don't agree.
Now remember, this isn't the New York Times saying that. This is a senior administration official, a political appointee, someone who has come in and maybe works in national security, maybe works someplace else, who's blasting the president, saying he's a threat to U.S. national security.
I think this president has done more to rebuild a broken military than anybody since Ronald Reagan. I think this president has taken it to our enemies much better than the last president. I think withdrawing from the Iran nuclear agreement was a good decision. I think cutting taxes is benefiting the average American. What they will say in the White House, palace intrigue is one thing, results are another. All I can say is that there'll be an election in 2020. And I don't know who this person is, but I got a call from the president at 8 o'clock this morning. He sounded really fine to me. Talked to John Kelly at 7:30 this morning. I've conducted business all day believing that John Kelly's going nowhere. The president was actually in a pretty good mood about Kavanaugh. And I don't know who this person is, but what I see coming out of the White House, I like. I don't know how they get to where they get, but they're getting to the right places, in my view.
You know, when I read this article in the New York Times, it was pretty stunning knowing it's not a New York Times editorial. This was not written by a writer for the New York. This is a senior administration official. I knew you were coming on the show, and immediately in my mind, I remembered what you said about Donald Trump in 2016. You remember, and I'm paraphrasing, but I think you used the words, he's a kook, he's unfit for office, he's crazy. You really went after him at the time. What has changed?
Well, he won, I lost, so I owe it to him to try to help him where I can, say no when I must. The people of South Carolina expect me to do that. All I can say is that people listen to me about as much as we're going to listen to the New York Times. I said a lot of things, nobody cared, and at the end of the day, he won in states we hadn't won in 30 years. I like what he's doing as president. I don't like all the things he says and does, but this is palace intrigue that will matter more on cable TV than anywhere else. In the world in which I live in South Carolina, this is going to matter zero.
Here's what the President of the United States just tweeted only a few minutes ago, and you can see it right there. We put it up on the screen in all caps. Treason, ? Treason? And he's obviously furious right now at this author of this article in the New York Times. He's clearly enraged about who leaked stuff to Bob Woodward, a man you and I know. And
he's a good journalist.
Clearly, he spoke with you at one point.
He did.
You passed on a request to the president for him to sit down with Bob Woodward.
I'll tell you about that. So I talked to Bob, so I'm sure he'll quote me accurately. The bottom line, I talked to Bob about Obama and almost every other president since I've been here. The bottom line is I told the president playing golf that Woodward was writing a book about him like he does every president. I'm sure he'd like to talk to you or think about it. He said, that's interesting. And it literally took a minute. Then we moved on to whether or not I was going to give him the putt. So here's what I think. The book by Bob Woodward is not going to determine the outcome of the 2020 election. It's something for people to consider. The anonymous editorial would piss me off if somebody in my office wrote it about me. Put yourself in the president's shoes. Wouldn't you be upset?
He's very upset.
Well, I don't blame him.
You know, he used the word treason just now, and all of a sudden I remember, you know, John Brennan, the former CIA director, spoke about treasonous.
Yeah.
Is it appropriate for the president to be suggesting treason, which is a crime, potentially the death penalty, for the president of the United States to raise the issue of treason, referring either to the author of this article who works for him, maybe inside his own cabinet, or for other sources who cooperated with Bob Woodward for this book?
This is not treason under the Constitution. This is not a treasonous act against the nation. It's a disloyal and cowardly act against the president. So I wouldn't say treason, but if I were him, I would really be upset that somebody wrote this. Come to him and, you know, at the end of the day, the president has every right to be upset, and this will matter nothing in 2020. He's either going to win or lose based on what he does for average people, not based on articles or books.
You know,
I think.
I know you're obviously very interested in national security.
Yes.
In the Bob Woodward book, he reports that the Defense Secretary, General James Mattis, retired, described the president as having the understanding on critical national security issues of a, quote, fifth or sixth grader. The Washington Post reporting today that there have now been talks about who eventually could replace James Mattis, talks that may be accelerated by the Woodward book. You saw James Mattis putting out a statement denying it. Your name, by the way, has come up as a possible replacement for James Mattis. Are you interested?
Well, one, that's the first I've heard of this. The answer is no. And General Mattis, I think, is committed to staying. At least I hope he is. If he leaves, that would be a loss for this White House, be a loss for the country. I've never heard General Mattis talk that way. So Bob Woodward is a good journalist, but I can say I've never heard a disrespectful word come out of General Mattis's mouth about the president.
If the president asked you to serve as the Secretary of Defense, would you?
No.
Why?
Because I like being a senator from South Carolina. I can do a bunch of things as senator from South Carolina.
But you could do a lot as Secretary of Defense, too.
Yeah. You know, he asked me to be ambassador to Pakistan. I said, thank you very much. No, thank you. That's the only time we've ever talked about a particular job. I like what I'm doing. I want to help him where I can. And, you know, what would happen if he withdrew from Afghanistan tomorrow and did not listen to his generals? What would happen if he left Syria and did not listen to his generals? I'd be his biggest critic. I like what the president's doing militarily. He seems to listen to people who've made it their life's work to defend the nation. As long as he'll do that, it's his ultimate decision. I'm going to be with this guy because I think he really is making us safer.
Would you serve as Attorney General of the United States?
No. Maybe I'd do both. I hear that if I could have both jobs. No, Wolf, no. It's not because I don't like the president. It's because I like being a senator. A cabinet official has never intrigued me at all.
But what about the way the President of the United States humiliates, berates,
I hate that.
talks so awful about the sitting Attorney General of the United States? Some of these quotes from the president, whether he says it publicly or tweets about it, are simply, Jeff Sessions.
Whatever you think about Jeff, he's a good man. If you don't want him to be your Attorney General, you have a right to replace him, but you're going to have to replace him with somebody and get confirmed. Nobody's going to get...
How do you explain that he berates his own Attorney General repeatedly, almost day after day after day? It's awful.
He does it with everybody. He went after the Pope. He goes after me. But here's what I would say. I have a working...
Is this a stable individual who does that to the sitting Attorney General of the United States?
I think most Americans believe that he was the answer better than Hillary Clinton.
Well, she got 3 million more votes.
I know, but
he won the Electoral College. Right. He is the duly elected president of the United States.
Everybody in the country understood who Donald Trump was. I don't like a lot of things he says about Jeff or other people, but most people factor that in the equation. They believe that they had nothing to lose and that Donald Trump would change things for the better. And here's what I think's happening. I think he's delivering on his campaign promises. He's going to win in 2020 unless something really dramatically changes, and I want to help him.
Because a lot of the people surrounding him apparently are not very happy, if you believe the Bob Woodward book, if you believe this article in the New York Times by the senior administration official. They're not very happy, but they stay put. Right. They're doing their job because they think they have a higher calling to the people of the United States, to the national security of the United States, and they're willing to go along. If they're afraid if they leave, they don't know what he would do.
Well, I talked to General Kelly this morning. He says it's challenging working for President Trump, and it is. I mean, President Trump is a handful at times, but he understands the American people better than anybody else that ran for president, and he's doing things that I approve of for the military, that I approve of for the economy, that he's picking judges that I would have picked. Whatever differences I have with the president, I like what he's doing, and the people working for him, I think, feel like they're doing the country a great service by being part of the Trump administration. To those who believe that this man is a fool, that this man is crazy, that there's something wrong with Donald Trump and it's just the people around him that keep us safe, you don't know what you're talking about.
Those were your words at one point in your life not that long, a couple of years ago. And you were thinking he was crazy.
He ran a campaign that I didn't like at all. I'm telling you, I lost, he won. And from the time he's been sworn in until now, he says a lot of things I don't like, but he's doing things I respect.